Thank you all for having me, and all the sponsors, the many sponsors of the tour. This is my second time in Edmonton. Actually, I came in 2000, I don't know, about 2000, about 15 years ago, with Salim Shawamri, the fellow I'm going to talk about tonight, whose home at that time had been demolished 3 times. We're up to 6 demolitions now. But Salim and I were here in Edmonton. At that time, we were taken to the mall, which I guess 15 years ago was a big deal. Salim still talks about this, still talks about it. I mean, for him, it was like a vision. You know, it's 40 below, and he walks into this building, and there's a beach. You know, and then he looks in the distance, and it's like an escalator, you know, there's people, he says, like they're going up to heaven. I swear, 3 weeks ago he was talking about this. I mean, Edmonton has been in his mind ever since. So anyway, it's good to be back on this tour. It's a month-long tour of Canada, from St. John's, where I was yesterday in Newfoundland. All right. Through Halifax and on to Victoria Island, Vancouver, Victoria, so in the winter, of course. But I wanted to come at a time when universities were in session, so. And I'm here to, well, we'll talk about it, to kind of mobilize the grassroots. I mean, you're pretty mobilized already. And that's really a good thing. The BDS movement is really catching on. But it's always good, to tell you the truth, in most of my talks, I talk to the choir. And I assume that most of you are the choir, which is okay as well. I mean, the choir should be updated, we should strategize, think about where we're going and so on. I don't get enough opportunity to talk to the Jewish community, obviously. But today I did talk to a high school class, and I was at King's College today, so there are audiences, new audiences as well. So what I want to talk about tonight, I guess this is kind of a 2-part thing in a way, the way it's been organized, although I'm not sure if it'll be the same audience both nights. But today to talk a little bit about where we are in the conflict, and a little bit about house demolitions. I'm a little hesitant because probably a lot of you know some of this, but anyway, I don't know if you heard me present, so there'll be a lot of new stuff. And so kind of where we are in the conflict, and then tomorrow night to talk a little bit more about where are we going, and especially the end of the 2-state solution and the beginning of to think about a 1-state solution and flesh out that idea. So we might touch on it tonight as well, but that'll be more tomorrow night. So basically then, you know, what I'd like to kind of address tonight is where are we? It's kind of give a certain context, assuming that most of you have the background, but nevertheless it's good to update. And then I want to walk you through the demolition of Salim's house, the different demolitions, because you know, I'm the head of the Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions, and that's proven a very powerful. We didn't really realize what a rich vein that was to mine when we began. We began almost 18 years ago. It was just an issue. You know, we were activists, we wanted to do something, and we kind of got into the house demolition issue, but we sort of backed into it. We didn't really realize how rich it could be in terms of really explaining how the occupation works, what Israel's intentions are, and the human cost of occupation. So I think you'll see it's a really good way, a window into the occupation and where we're going. And then we'll step back a little bit and maybe talk a little bit about where we're going with it all. So, so we can just begin with this map. I mean, there's sort of an embarrassment of maps here. I can only focus on one. So I don't know, should I go to this one since I'm right-handed? But you can follow over there, I guess. This is going to be an aptitude test for you guys. So this is a map, it's just a place to start, of what we call the two-state solution. And the two-state solution is, in a sense, the solution to the conflict. I mean, one of the, I think, what I try to emphasize to people is that this isn't only a local conflict between two groups in some faraway place. If it was just a local spat, I mean, who would care? There's a million of those all over the place. But this is really a conflict that disrupts the entire international system. I mean, it's a global conflict. It has obvious implications for the wider Middle East. You know, it introduces a militarism. It has a lot to do with the polarization and the alienation between the West and the Muslim world. You know, it introduces big party politics, big power politics into the Middle East. You know, John Kerry said about a month ago that you're not going to resolve the wider issues of the Middle East, which is a pretty important geopolitical part of the world, until you resolve the Israel-Palestine conflict. It doesn't create, it doesn't cause all the other conflicts, but unless you deal with and close it down, you're not going to be able to get on to stabilizing the rest of the Middle East and getting to a better order there, which echoes what James Baker said 10 years ago in terms of the impact of this conflict on Iraq. So that it's tremendously destabilizing in a very important part of the world, and the militarization as well. I mean, Israel itself is getting $30 billion in new arms from the United States in over a 10-year period, 2008 to 2018, that will probably be renewed and even increased. So you begin to bring that amount of weaponry into the most volatile part of the world, not to mention, of course, all the oil money. Saudi Arabia last year bought $74 billion of arms from the United States. And you can begin to understand the destabilizing power. But beyond that, I think it destabilizes and affects all our lives. I mean, certainly in Canada, you know, I mean, I've just been here a couple of weeks, and it sounds like Israel. Everything is terrorism. Everything is framed in security. You know, it's the same discourse. And I can see, and you know, your ex-foreign minister is in Ramallah in a wonderful meeting with Palestinians. You know, you can see. Matter of fact, there was a caricature I saw in the paper last week. I don't know if you saw it, if it's in all the papers, with Baird sitting behind a desk in the UN with Israel, the word Israel in front of him, as if he was representing Israel. And of course you have things like the Canada-Israel Public Safety Agreement that was signed in 2006 that brings Israel into your prison systems, brings Israel into your border controls, training your police, working on immigration issues. In other words, Israel has been invited in to the very heart of your sovereignty. Public safety is internal. It's not the military. It's police and prisons and things like that. And you know, so that you know, and I've seen myself being here for a couple of weeks, the militarization of the Canadian police. I mean, the uniforms are changing into a much more militarized uniform. The weaponry, now you have Israelis training, I mean, it's like Ferguson, Canada style. And it's all up front. You know, super up front, of course, with the Harper government. And of course, and this is the book I'm writing that's going to come out in 2050. You know, when you're an activist, it's not so easy to write books. I tell my academic friends that one of my books is worth 5 of theirs. Because I don't have sabbaticals, I don't have access to libraries. You know, it's not so easy to be an activist scholar, so it takes a while. But it has to do, my book, with what I call global Palestine. How, in fact, Israel is exporting the occupation. So on one level, not only your military, but your public safety sector, police and security services and airports and prisons and so on, are being Israelized in the sense of tactics and weaponry coming from Israel and the whole discourse of security and terrorism. And on the other hand, you're on the receiving end. So you, the people, are becoming Palestinianized. And what I'm trying to tell people is, don't think that what happened to the people of Gaza this summer just ended in Gaza. I mean, you can't explain the disproportionate force used by Israel. Weapons of conventional warfare, artillery and ships and laser-guided missiles and Apache helicopters and tanks, and you can't explain that massive, drones, that massive use of force on little tiny Gaza. I mean, the force was so disproportionate to the actual threat that something else had to have been going on. And so I look at Gaza as a laboratory. Not just Gaza, the entire occupied territory is kind of a laboratory, as a resource, actually. I mean, it's hard to explain why Israel didn't accept the two-state solution, which is a tremendously pro-Israel solution. It's hard to explain unless there's an elephant in the room that we're not seeing. And I'm suggesting that that's the military security. That's not only important for Israel's economy. Military homeland security is $1.5 trillion industry every year. $1.5 trillion. I mean, a country to get involved with that's a pretty good thing. And in addition, of course, it raises your political clout to be considered a major military power, an associate of NATO, a strategic ally of the United States. So from that point of view, the occupied territory is a resource, and certainly a place where you develop and perfect weaponry and devices of homeland security for export. So in fact, the people of Gaza are the guinea pigs. They're not the end users. You're the end users. And that weaponry and those tactics and devices perfected on the Palestinians, on the 600 checkpoints in the West Bank. Israel's the world's leader in biometrics, reading eyes for identification, facial recognition, voice recognition, body recognition that goes into these surveillance cameras that your municipalities are starting to put in, and airports put in. So all this comes right into your life. And of course, as neoliberal regimes like Canada begin to cut back on social programs and social budgets, and you have income disparities and austerity, I mean, it's clear your military budgets go up and your homeland security budgets go up. And that militarization has got to be a part of that. How do you keep not only the third world repressed from where your resources are coming? The main form of war today is called resource wars. But then how do you repress also your own population that's becoming more and more impoverished and disenfranchised? So in other words, this ramifies out from the Palestinians to the Middle East and then wider globally until it affects your very lives. So it's a conflict that, in a sense, encapsulates a lot of, it's like a microcosm, what's happening in the wider world. And that's, I think, why we have to be concerned about it. Beyond the human rights of Palestinians and justice and everything else, there's some much greater, what I call global Palestinian reasons to why we have to resolve this, and really kind of use it as a way of raising consciousness about how it's ramifying out, that I think is very useful. So I go back then to say that with everything we're talking about, there is a solution. And that's a two-state solution. It's not a fair solution, it's not just, but this has been agreed upon by almost everybody. In other words, the idea is a simple one. This is basically one country between the Mediterranean and the Jordan River. Palestinians call it Palestine, Jews call it the land of Israel, Christians call it the Holy Land. Whatever you call it, it's one integral country in which there are today two peoples living. Whether there should be two peoples or not is another issue, but there are two peoples. There's Palestinian Arabs and Israeli Jews. And so the basic idea of the two-state solution is, all right, let's take this country and partition it between the two peoples. Now, it's not a fair and just solution in the sense that in this country today, half the population is Palestinian. And that's before any refugees return or any Palestinians from the diaspora. So whether or not they return, demographically there will be in the very near future a Palestinian majority. So we never hear about the Palestinians' generous offer. And that is back in 1988. So we're talking, what, 27 years ago. The PLO formally accepted the two-state solution. Now, whether they should have or not, that's another question. Edward Said thought that that was a mistake. But it was done publicly. The Palestinians basically then, by recognizing the state of Israel, within what are called the 1967 borders, that are actually the 1949 armistice lines, the Palestinians gave up political claim to 78% of their country. You know, which is this, once you recognize Israel within these borders, which the Palestinian Authority still does. I mean, this isn't a one-shot thing. This continues to be the policy. In a sense, you've given up political claim to 78% of your country, meaning that the majority of the population has said to Israel, we will make peace with you for less than a quarter of the land. We, the majority, will make peace with you, with our oppressors, with our colonizers, for only 22% of the land. The West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza, the occupied territory, constitute only 22% of historic Palestine. Wow, that's a pretty generous offer. You know, I don't know of any other colonized people in the world that has ever done that, given up so much in order to achieve peace and some modicum of self-determination. But rather than getting credit for it, of course, Palestinians are accused of terrorism. I mean, instead of being given credit for doing something that no other colonized people ever did in order to make peace, they're criticized because they want the 22%. The 22% is too much. And so they made that offer. So the two-state solution has been accepted by the Palestinians. It's accepted, of course, by the international community. The United States, Canada on paper, the international community, and the two-state solution was accepted by the Arab League unanimously in 2002 in what's called the Arab Peace Initiative, where the Arab League said to Israel, not only will we recognize you and make peace with you if you give up the occupied territory, we will integrate you into the region. And here there's a subtext, and that is, and here's where the military comes into play again. We want you to be the regional hegemon, or a regional hegemon. In other words, take the Palestinians out of the equation. No countries have closer, more common foreign policy objectives than Israel and the conservative Arab regimes. I mean, there's one country that Israel's closer to than Canada. That's Egypt. You know? Jordan, Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has, this is actually what was known as the Saudi Peace Initiative. So Saudi Arabia, with all its religious ideology, is saying to Israel, we're the ones that want you to come in. We'll let you fly over Saudi Arabia to attack Iran. So all of a sudden, what's been called all these years the Israeli-Arab conflict, all of a sudden disappears. Where actually Israel and the Arabs, if you consider the Arabs to be, which they aren't, but you consider, you know, if you take them to be the conservative regimes, all of a sudden they're the same side. And the Palestinians are the common enemy. You see? So the whole thing begins to be shifted, especially because Israel has earned that place by being this military power. So it's part of what I call security politics. But at any rate, even Saudi Arabia is saying to Israel, look, even we have public opinion. You know, we can't normalize with you until you get rid of the occupation. Get rid of this damn occupation already. And yeah, come join us. We want you to be in our club. The old boys conservative militaristic club of the Middle East. You know, and I think, I'm not going to get into this, but I think actually that's where Sharon was going. I think that's part of what was behind the Gaza disengagement. You know, when Sharon left the Likud, set up his own party, he had, Sharon, whatever you want to say about Sharon, and there's a lot to say about Sharon, he was a grand thinker. You know, and I think for him, you know, when the Arab Peace Initiative was announced, Israel dismissed it. But I think he began to think about it and began to really realize what it really meant. And for him to reject the offer of being a regional hegemon for the sake of keeping Jericho and Ramallah didn't add up. I mean, you're talking the West Bank for him was peanuts. So here he's got the whole Middle East opening up in front of him. And I think he was maybe, you don't know, he didn't say anything, but I think he was maybe in that process. And then of course he had a stroke, and then you go back to the little thinkers, Olmert and Netanyahu, and so on. The point I'm trying to make is that everybody agrees on this solution except one party, and that's Israel. Israel says no. And all the governments of Israel have said no. Labor, Likud, Kadima, whatever they are, since '67, no. For different reasons, security reasons, religious reasons, nationalistic reasons, but the thrust of the policy has been the same all the way through. And that is not only to say no to the two-state solution, but in fact to incorporate the occupied territory into Israel. To eliminate the two-state solution, so it can never ever be. And this is what we call a policy of Judaization, which is a term that's used officially by Israel. We're Judaizing the country, meaning we're turning Palestine into the land of Israel. So that's the thrust. Now, it's not enough just to say that, because, you know, the international community does kind of want a two-state solution. They're not going to force Israel. And that's where Israel, in a sense, wins. But what Israel's done in order to raise the ante, to make it impossible to force it out, is to lay over the occupied territory what I call a matrix of control. What Israel calls facts on the ground that are so massive and so permanent that they prejudice negotiations. In other words, Israel will go into negotiations with the Palestinians, but on condition that they win. We're not going to get into negotiations and lose. So, which means then that we set the parameters of what can be negotiated before we get into negotiations. And that's what the facts on the ground do. So, what Israel's done, I'm not going to get into this in detail, is a couple things. First of all, it's fragmented the Palestinian territory. There is no more coherent territory that could become a Palestinian state. Palestinians today, 95% of the Palestinians in the West Bank live in what are called areas A and B. These darker brown area A and beige area B, enclaves, islands, cells, actually, in the West Bank. And of course, Gaza is a cage. So they're all confined to that. Areas A and B in Gaza represent 38% of the occupied territory. So we can say that 95% of the Palestinians are confined to 38% of 22% of their country. And then that is fragmented into all these little, about 70 little islands. And then those islands are all surrounded by checkpoints. There's more than 600 checkpoints inside the West Bank and East Jerusalem as well. You know, so now you get the idea of why Israel's so good at airport security. You've got millions of Palestinians every day passing through 600 checkpoints. So again, kind of like guinea pigs that you can perfect your surveillance equipment on. And there's magnetic cards, and there's biometrics, and it's a highly technical kind of occupation. So you have the checkpoints, and then you've got the settlements. So all the gray area, plus the pink I'll talk about in a second, this is all called Area C. The 62% of the occupied territory completely controlled by Israel. That surrounds all these little enclaves, and the blue blotches all over are the settlements. More than 200 settlements, more than 500,000 Israelis living in the occupied territory. All connected into Israel by a whole system of highways. 28 major highways, many of which are off limits to Palestinians, that then connect and incorporate the West Bank into Israel itself. So the whole idea of the two-state solution, you see, is a kind of a north-south axis. Here's Israel, and then alongside of it is a Palestinian state. So what Israel's done systematically is to make east-west connections. You see, Ariel here in the highways connect Israel to the Jordan Valley. It's like a grid. You've got this big highway, Highway 6, a new highway that is like the new demographic backbone of Israel to move the Israeli population from the coast this way and be the backbone in which, onto which you connect the settlements. You see, it really is shifting the whole population of Israel to a place where the major population centers meet. And then you've got these pink areas are what Israel calls its settlement blocks. There's 7 of them that are the major settlements. So you see you've got the Jordan Valley, you've got the Ariel block this way, you have the Modi'in block this way. 3 blocks make up Greater Jerusalem, so you're dividing the West Bank east and west here and here, and then a salient coming up to Hebron in this way. So you've got a whole grid of this highway. This is Highway 60 that cuts through the whole West Bank. Highway 90 goes this way. The Jerusalem 443 goes this way, and the Ariel Highway goes this way. And that then locks the Palestinians into what Israel calls cantons. So you can see there's a canton in the north, a canton in the center, a canton in the south, and Gaza. So you begin to get the outlines of a Bantustan. Certainly not a viable, congruent Palestinian state. Now, if you still haven't got the message, if you still think the two-state solution is alive, we built the wall. for people that really have trouble visualizing and have to see something concrete. So you got the wall. Now the wall is not a security barrier. It's not against terrorism. It has nothing to do with security whatsoever. As a matter of fact, the official name of the wall is the separation barrier. So we use the concept of apartheid. The word in Hebrew, hafradah, means separation and apartheid. Apartheid means separateness. So it's the same. We talk about apartheid. We simply say it in Hebrew instead of in Afrikaans. And if you look at the root of the wall, it's clear what it's doing. The wall hugs areas A and B. You see? Go like this. So now you can really see in concrete the cantons. The canton here, the canton here, the canton here, and then Gaza. And on the other side of the wall, it's clear that it comes down, and when it hits a settlement block, you see, it incorporates the settlement block into Israel. You can't tell me the wall comes to here for security reasons. I mean, it's clear it's incorporating the major settlements and the land, and then separating the Palestinians out into these little enclaves. The wall is more than twice the height of the Berlin Wall. The wall is 8 meters high, and the Berlin Wall was 4 meters high. And it's 5 times longer than the Berlin Wall was. So that these two, 30 years, the older people here will remember that, 30 years ago, there were 2 major oppressive systems in the world that we all fought against. One was the apartheid regime in South Africa, and the other one was the Berlin Wall. Both of which you have in Little Palestine, and both of which are supported by the Canadian government. So, now, in order to do this, in order to really imprison the Palestinians in these little islands and these little cells of A and B, Israel has to remove the Palestinian population from Area C, again, which is the 62% of the West Bank that Israel controls where the settlements are. So that that's where Palestinian villages are, that's where farms are, a lot of the population. For example, in 1967, there were 250,000 Palestinians living in the Jordan Valley, which is desert, but it has oases, and you could do some significant farming here. And of course, you had a lot of Bedouins as well with their livelihoods. There were 250,000 Palestinians. Today, there's less than 50,000 left in the Jordan Valley, 30,000 of whom live in Jericho. So it's been almost completely depopulated. And the policy of house demolitions is maybe one of the key ways of enforcing this. So I want to just take a few minutes and walk you through a demolition of Salim Shawamri's house. This is Salim that was so taken with your mall. Salim, his wife Arabia, and their 7 kids. Because it'll give us a good sense of not coming down from this grand political discussion to the nitty-gritty. How is it really done? And how do I know that Israel doesn't want a 2-state solution? Salim and Arabia are children of refugees from 1948. They're cousins. And their families came from inside Israel, not far from Beersheba. And in 1948, Salim's family went to Jerusalem. So he was born in the Old City, and then moved in his childhood to the Shuafat refugee camp, which is a refugee camp in Jerusalem, where he grew up, and went to an UNRWA school, and became an engineer. Arabia's side of the family went to Jordan, where she grew up. They were married, and then went to Saudi Arabia for 10 years, where Salim worked as a construction engineer. When the Oslo peace process began in 1993, they came back to Palestine. You know, they wanted to be a part of rebuilding their country, you know, thinking that a Palestinian state is on the way. And they bought a small plot of land in the town of Anata, which is right next to Jerusalem. Matter of fact, part of Anata is even in Jerusalem. And they bought the land, registered, fine. But they're in the West Bank. So they had to get a building permit from the Israeli authorities. So Salim applied for a building permit from what Israel calls its civil administration, which is in fact a military government. So here we get into language. How are we sanitizing the occupation? We don't talk about occupation. We don't use the word Palestinians. Talk about Arabs in a very general way. So we don't give recognition and legitimacy to some collective that has competing rights to us. We don't talk about the West Bank. Talk about Judea and Samaria. We don't talk about settlements. We talk about communities. And we don't talk about a military government. We have a civil administration. So Salim applies to the civil administration for a permit, and the answer is no. Which the policy is not to allow Palestinians to build since 1967. Building is frozen, almost frozen, meaning that 2-3 generations of Palestinians can't have homes on land they own. I mean, they can own the land. There's no question about his ownership, but not allowed to build. Well, how do you do that? How do you deny an entire population the right to build homes, which is a fundamental human right, to have a home, and still present yourself as the only democracy in the Middle East? I mean, how do you do? Well, and it's a very good case study in control, because the army is only a piece of it. If possible, we don't want to use the army. On the contrary, we want to normalize the administration as if it's normal, proper administration with no occupation or oppressive elements to it. So what Israel's basically done is zoned the entire West Bank as agricultural land. It's agricultural land. So when a Palestinian comes and says, I want to build a home, the answer is, sorry, but this is agricultural land. And no, not because you're an Arab. This isn't discriminatory. It's true for Jews as well. Nobody can build because it's agricultural. Okay. And if I was the Israeli ambassador, I'd be relating this with a straight face. But wait a minute, you say, but wait a minute. There's 200 settlements on the same land. I mean, here's Salim's house. I'll show you. Right here is Salim's house. And right here is Ma'ale Adumim, which is a settlement of 50,000 Israelis on the same land right next door. So how does that work? I mean, it's simple. It's Kafkaesque, but it's simple. Israelis sit on the planning commission. That's it. All you have to do is rezone from agriculture to residential in a second, if you want to do it. So it's all legal, and so on. In other words, it's a good example of using these dry, gray, bureaucratic mechanisms. Administration, law, planning, zoning, that people their eyes start to glaze over, they're bored already. You know, people can't write about it in newspapers because it's too complicated and too technical. To use this as a way of concealing a political agenda. You see? And so that's really how it's done. But they also play mind games with the Palestinians. So Salim applies, gets turned down, but they say to him, but you know, you're a good guy, you've never been political, apply again. You know, we're really okay. You know, we just want a zone, but if you apply again, we'll probably give you the permit. You know, so he applies again. They play these kinds of games. He applied 3 times, Each time it cost them $5,000. So this is obviously unaffordable. 70% of the Palestinians live under the poverty line. You know, you have 7 kids, you make $500 a month. You can't afford to play that game. Salim had a little nest egg from Saudi Arabia, and and they're desperate. They want to get a permit. They're not trying to build illegally. They want a permit. And it's like a lottery. It's very cruel in a way. It's like a lottery. I mean, you have lotteries here. So I have bad news for you. You're not going to win. Forget it. But you play it anyway. I mean, the lottery has millions and millions of dollars. It's the same thing here. If Israel denied 100% applications, nobody would play the game. I mean, if you don't win, if you know you're not going to win the lottery, you're not going to put money into it. So last year, there's 2.5 million Palestinians living in the West Bank. Last year, Israel issued 18 building permits, which is really at the level of a lottery. And again, it's the same thing. You say to yourself, I'm a good guy. They told me in the civil administration I'm a good guy. They know my case. They know I'm not political. Maybe I have a lawyer working for me. I know, this person. You kind of build a case for yourself, and you get turned down. So finally, after and this took 3 or 4 years, this process, Salim and Arabia, like thousands of other Palestinians, built a small home for themselves without a building permit. So that's illegal. And immediately they were served with a demolition order from the civil administration. Now, you kind of do a cold calculation if you're a Palestinian. You say, look, there's tens of thousands of house demolition orders outstanding. Maybe my house will get lost in the shuffle. They won't notice. Maybe they won't come for a year. Maybe they won't come for 5 years. Maybe I'll win the lottery and they'll never come. You end up, it's not a strategy because it's not coordinated, but Palestinians end up building faster than Israel can demolish, basically. Although Israel has demolished 48,000 Palestinian homes in the occupied territory since 1967. 48,000 homes, which is a human disaster in any dimension. If there was an earthquake somewhere and 48,000 homes, Canada would be marshalling all its rescue services. So he couldn't get the permit, built the house, and immediately got a demolition order. So you can live in the house, you never know when they're going to come. You have the order, but you don't know when they're going to come. I've talked to a lot of Palestinian women that have said to me, the first thing I do in the morning when I wake up is look out the window to see if there's police, army, bulldozers, and if the coast is clear, I get dressed and wake up the kids and start making breakfast. So you're in your home, but you're not living securely. They can come in the middle of the night, early in the morning. And in fact, the family lived in their home for 5 years, until one day, in the middle of the day, they're having lunch in July 1998, there's a knock on the door. Now, I don't know what civil servants look like in Edmonton, but this is what they look like if you're a Palestinian. This is Rami, and this is Micha, 2 civil servants of the civil administration, accompanied by dozens of soldiers. Salim answers the door, and they're settlers, by the way. I mean, what civilians, Israeli civilians, can work for the civil administration, which is located in the middle of the West Bank to the east of Ramallah? Settlers. So these are 2 guys living on stolen Palestinian land, ideologically committed to getting Arabs out of our country, who are put in a position of authority to decide who's going to have a home and who's going to be demolished this year. Salim answers the door. Rami says to him, "Is this your house?" Salim says, "Yes, it's my house." Rami says, "No, it isn't. It's our house now. You've got 15 minutes to get all your belongings out. We're going to demolish it." Now, what would you do? You're not a criminal. You're not a terrorist. You've never been charged with anything. You know, and it's your home with everything. You know, think of what you have in your home. So you would, I don't know what you would do. You'd protest. You'd yell. I don't know what you'd do. When that happens, it's considered resistance. And the soldiers are not there for decoration. And Salim was beaten and thrown out of his house. In all the commotion, Arabia managed to slam the door shut with her and the kids inside and lock it. And that's when she started calling. She called us. She called frantically anybody she could think of. And it's a whole story, but we happened to be fairly nearby, and that's how I got there to take these pictures. In the meantime, the soldiers broke the windows of the house and threw in tear gas canisters to flush out the family. Now, I don't know if you've ever had a whiff of tear gas outside, which is pretty powerful stuff. Inside your home, it's overwhelming. And then they broke in the door. Arabia was carried out unconscious. The kids running and screaming in every direction. So this is a trauma that's going to stay with this family forever. I mean, house demolitions isn't like your home's demolished, too bad, and the next day you get on with your life. It's a trauma, the violence, the noise, the humiliation, and the fear, everything that stays with this family forever. And now multiply this 48,000 times. You know, just this summer in Gaza, this last summer, in July and August, Israel demolished 18,000 Palestinian homes that haven't been rebuilt. You've got 18,000 families in Gaza, which isn't Edmonton, but it's pretty cold in the winter, exposed to the elements. So that this is an ongoing, this last week, Israel's demolished 50 homes of Palestinians in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. So it's ongoing all the time. And if we can, we get into the act. Israeli activists that come out to resist. We resist the demolitions of Palestinian homes. We chain ourselves in homes. We get on the roof. I get in front of bulldozers, which is why I'm built this way. And we resist. And as we're resisting, we're slowing things down. We're calling activists, we're calling diplomats, we're calling journalists to, because if we can make a commotion, we've lost this house. It's gone. But they've come to demolish 10 houses. So if we can make a commotion and get attention, maybe they'll retreat. You see, because they don't want it to be filmed, they don't want it to be recorded, and we've saved 3, 4, 5 houses that would have been demolished that day. So finally, the family's out of the house, we're out of the house. The civil administration subcontracts to commercial companies for demolishing homes. In other words, if you have a company, a little construction company, you own a little bulldozer, you can apply to the civil administration for a contract. A normal commercial contract to demolish Palestinian homes. So Rami says to the contractor, throw everything out of the house. Everybody's gone. You got 5 minutes. Whatever you can throw. Otherwise, we'll just demolish it. So they send in foreign workers. This happens to be a worker from Romania, that works for this company. And everything is torn out, ripped out. You can see your cabinets, your furniture, your papers are flying. This happens to be in the summer, which is bad enough. Imagine in the winter with the rain and everything. And you're financially ruined. The sense of invasion, of course, is very strong. And then the bulldozer comes to demolish the home. Comes through the wall that Salim built, the garden that Salim planted, and begins to demolish the house. Here there's a tragedy and a tragedy. The driver of the bulldozer is a Palestinian. Just happens to be a guy that works for this company. You know, one morning he's sent to build a road, the next morning he's sent to demolish a house, and he knew Salim, they're friends. So you can imagine what's going through his mind as he's demolishing his friend's home. And Salim is lying on the ground watching. One reason why house demolitions is such a powerful advocacy tool for us is because it counters the Israeli framing. Israel has gotten the public, the media, governments to believe that everything it does is for security. If you go out in the street and ask anybody, why is Israel demolishing Palestinian homes? First of all, people don't know. But if you think about it for 10 seconds, there's only one answer that Israel leaves you with. Well, these have to be homes of terrorists. But why else would Israel do it? It's a good country. It's a European. It's our ally. It's the only democracy in the Middle East. There's got to be a reason. And the only reason that Israel leaves us with is terrorism. But no, it's not true. There's no terrorism in this story. There's no security element. There's no defense. It's a proactive policy of taking Palestinian land and shoving them into areas A and B, or making them leave the country. And of the 48,000 homes, less than a 0.5% were demolished for anything having to do with security. Whether it's military invasions like Gaza, where all those homes were demolished just as collateral damage. They weren't targeted, they were simply in the way. Or in this case, intentionally denying Palestinians building permits, there's nothing security. So our telling of the story reframes the conflict. If Salim's house isn't being demolished for security reasons, something else is happening. There's another reason that we're not being told. And that then people begin to understand occupation, that Israel's a strong party, the occupation is proactive, not reactive, and therefore that Israel can be held accountable for what it's doing. So here you have Baird going to Ramallah to chide Abu Mazen for the fact that he went to the ICC, to the International Criminal Court. I mean, here, Israel's allowed to do this, and the Palestinians aren't even allowed to use the instruments at their disposal to defend their human rights. That's how the whole thing has been turned on its head. And the home is demolished. It's gone. So, what we do as acts of political resistance is to rebuild homes that have been demolished. We've built 187 homes over the last 13, 14 years as political acts of resistance. This isn't humanitarian. This isn't good Israelis going out to help their poor Palestinian victims. But it's joint building together. You see, Israelis, Palestinians, one of our slogans is, we refuse to be enemies. And you're all called, in our lingo, internationals that come to build with us. For example, you see these people with the red baseball caps. Those are Christian peacemaker teams. That's what they wear, and we have one here at least, and maybe more. Christians, largely Mennonites, many Canadians, Mennonites, Quakers, Church of the Brethren, other denominations that come and sort of bear witness between the army, the Palestinians, and the settlers, and work with us in house rebuilding. And plus others that come as well, other activists. So we rebuild Palestinian homes. This is the tent that the family was given by the Red Crescent Society. When we build, we only work through Palestinian organizations. In other words, it's very important for us that we're working through Palestinians, not, you know, if we just came and decided we're going to build for you, we'd be replicating the whole colonial relationship. So we work through Palestinian organizations like the Land Defense Committee, and it's genuinely a peacemaking effort, I think. It's political, first of all, but you know, it takes us 2 weeks at least, sometimes longer, to build a home. So we eat together. Here's Salim. This is maklube, which is one of the Palestinian national dishes. Eating together. Here's Arabia, between two Israeli women rebuilding her home. Arabia has never met an Israeli that wasn't a soldier. So here you've got people coming not only in political solidarity, but here people coming in her moment of distress and despair, coming to be with her to help her rebuild the home. I mean, to have a woman that's gone through what Arabia's gone through smiling is really something. And we got the house, we started building the house. Now you get a good look at the agricultural land. Right? Salim says it hasn't been farmed since Adam. But you know, it doesn't matter whether it's really the Judean desert. But it doesn't matter. It's the pretext for, you know, it doesn't really, it's not connected to zoning. Zoning is simply that pretext for not granting building permits. And we got the house up. You can still see the scaffolding. We had just poured the roof of the house, the concrete, the night before, and I had a feeling they were going to come back. A demolition order is like a diamond. It's forever. And it doesn't matter where you position the house. And I thought they were going to come back. And sure enough, we spent the night. 4:30 in the morning, the soldiers come back. Here's one of the Christian peacemaker people that slept with us that night. Micha comes back, the bulldozers, the whole scene repeats itself, and the house is demolished again. I mean, they just had to kind of push over this wet concrete structure. Just to give you a little cute something in the middle of all this, just to locate all this is the Hebrew University on Mount Scopus. That's how close we are. And this building right here is the Truman Center for Peace. So you can sit in the library of the Truman Center for Peace and watch homes being demolished. So you talk about the ivory tower, and the home is gone again. Salim's face kind of says it all. You know, this is even the coffee we didn't have a chance to drink yet in the morning. So we decided to rebuild again. In other words, if this was humanitarian, it would make no sense. Why would you rebuild a home that's going to be demolished again? But there's a political logic to it. The political logic is, if you demolish 100 times, we're going to rebuild it 101 times. We're not going to let the occupation win. And so we rebuilt. And now this is taking time. Sometimes it takes a couple of years in between. You know, we have to raise the money. We're going to get to that. We have to, you know, and we have to be sure, you know, we're also building in other places. This isn't the only house that we're building. And also we want to be sure the family wants to go through this again. You know, this is very traumatic. The violence again, fighting the army, it takes tremendous courage to do this. You know, your kids are going through the whole trauma. You can be fined, you can be arrested. You know, not every family wants to build again. So we give them really time to think about it. And we got a third house up over time. You see a small home. The family moved in. And the next day, the civil administration was back again. And the whole story repeats itself. Here's Micha again, foreign workers coming, and the furniture is removed from the house. And the bulldozer comes, a Caterpillar bulldozer, which is why in the BDS campaign we're asking universities, churches, people to divest their stocks from Caterpillar. And here it wasn't a bulldozer, but a pneumatic drill in order to dig up the foundations of the home so we couldn't rebuild again. And the home was demolished yet again. Salim says the demolition of a home is really the demolition of a family. You know, human beings can't live without a home. You know, we need that space for ourselves personally, to raise a family. You have to have a home. A home is an extension of a human being and of a family. So, but men, women, and children relate very differently, react differently to demolitions. For men, like Salim, it's very emasculating. You're humiliated in front of your kids, you know, which is hard in any culture. And you can't protect your family. You can't provide shelter for your family. You know, but men, at least, work out of the house. They can vent. They have other men around, they're out, they kind of get the anger out to some degree, and all the pain. For women, it's kind of a double tragedy. Most Palestinian women don't work outside of the home. So for them, the domestic sphere defines them as people, as women, as mothers, as wives. So when you lose that, you become kind of disoriented. You know, you don't know, I mean, not just practically in terms of, all right, how do I feed my family dinner tonight? But, you know, how do I fulfill, you know, you just don't even know where to begin to put your life together, to fulfill your duties in the family. And many women kind of withdraw into a kind of a mourning, like Arabia. You know, you can't live in a tent forever. So what you have to do eventually is move into the home of another woman. Not your sister or not your family, but your husband's family. You have to move in with your husband's parents or one of your husband's brothers. So now you're moving into the home of another woman. You know, that family doesn't have adequate housing either. I mean, they can't build the way they would like. So they're living in inadequate conditions. And you're moving in now with 7 kids. Forever. I mean, it's not like for the weekend. What are you going to do? So that for all the solidarity, you know, pretty soon having 14, 20 people living in the same house obviously creates all kinds of tensions. You know, Arabia is after Salim to get her out. She needs her space. Salim can't do it. He doesn't have money. He can't rebuild the home. So it really, and it even leads, I have to admit, to domestic violence in the family because, you know, you don't have divorce. A divorce is not common in Palestinian society. So it destroys the family from that point of view. And what about the kids? You know, for kids, your home is your sacred space. It's your room, your stuff. You know, kids go home for vacation, you know, at the university or something. This is Lena, who's one of Salim's daughters, Salim and Arabia's daughters, who went blind during one of the demolitions. The demolition was happening, I was there, and all of a sudden she couldn't see. So we put her in the car, we rushed her to the hospital, and in the emergency ward, when the doctor was coming and she was calming down a bit, her sight began to come back. And the doctor explained that it's a kind of hysterical blindness. In other words, when your mind can't process what's going on, it simply shuts down. So you can imagine the depth of trauma that these kids are going through with these demolitions and everything around it. So at any rate, we rebuilt the home again and again and again. It's been demolished 6 times. In one of the demolitions, we put, in one of the new homes we built, we did a mural on the wall. This lasted a few years. And you can see it's a dead Caterpillar bulldozer amidst a pile of dead armaments. You don't see it very well, but there's Palestinian and Israeli and international workers marching together. There's kind of international worker solidarity. And hovering over the scene are the forms of 2 women that died in house demolitions. One of them, on the left, you know probably, Rachel Corrie, the American college student who was killed in Gaza in 2003 when she was defending a Palestinian home, wearing a bright orange and yellow vest, and a bulldozer ran over her twice. The other woman is Nuha Swaydan. She was the pregnant mother of 10 children living in Gaza, who was killed about 2 weeks before Rachel when the Israeli army demolished their home on top of them at night when they were in bed, and she died. So the forms of these 2 women hang over the house. And then last year the Israeli army demolished the house twice. Once in January, we rebuilt it, and then again in November. This time coming in the middle of the night. The bulldozers come, and the same thing. The families rousted out of their beds. The furniture's thrown out as much as they did. Here, there's a Bedouin. You see encampment up above. 8 Bedouin homes were demolished that night as well. And the whole scene just repeats itself. This is just last year. And this is what Salim and Arabiya found in the morning. So just to round this up then, let me just say a word about, if Scott will allow me, a word about where we're going, and we'll talk about it more tomorrow. And that is that, all right, what does all this mean? I mean, all right, we know where Israel's going. I think I can make a good case that the 2-state solution is gone. So where are we going in this conflict? It seems to me that there's 3 options. I mean, there's 5 options, actually. 2 of them I'm eliminating. One is that all the Jews are driven out of the country. And the second one is that all the Palestinians are driven out of the country. Eliminating those, there's 3 options, it seems to me, that we have for resolving this. Or not resolving it, for 3 options. One is the 2-state solution, you know, which I'm not against. I mean, if the Palestinians accept it, I mean, who am I to say no? It's not fair, it's not just, but okay. Palestinians would have a small state, they'd have some contiguous territory, they'd have borders with Arab countries, they'd have a seaport, an airport. You know, you have Jerusalem and Bethlehem, which isn't a bad resource for a small country with tourism. In other words, they could make a go of it, but it's gone. I would argue, I mean, you can agree or disagree, but it's gone. It's over. There is no 2-state solution. Nobody is going to force Israel back to those lines. You know, we're talking about 500,000 people, and the United States certainly is not going to exert the pressures on Israel you would need to do that. So it's gone, buried under the settlements and the matrix of control. That means then, if we don't have a 2-state solution, de facto, there is one state today. There is one state. The whole argument, should there be 2 states or 1 state, is gone. There is one state. Israel has created one state. And it's called Israel. You know, whether it's all annexed or not, it doesn't matter. There's only one government between the Mediterranean and the Jordan River that has any authority. There's only one army. There's only one currency. Whether you're in Gaza or in Hebron or in Tel Aviv,
you're all using the shekel. The economy is all controlled by the Bank of Israel. There's only one water system, one electrical system, one highway system. By any measure, there's only one sovereign power in this entire country, and that's Israel. And it's an apartheid state. And we have to just say it. I mean, Jimmy Carter said it years ago. It's not even controversial anymore. As a matter of fact, it's worse than apartheid. It's apartheid in the sense that apartheid is two elements. Apartheid means when one population separates itself from the others, that's apart. That's the apartheid, separateness. And then that population creates a regime of permanent institutionalized domination. Once you have a regime of separation and domination, that's apartheid. And it doesn't matter if it's based on race, like South Africa, or religion, ethnicity, nationalism, like here, or the color of your eyes. Who cares if you have that kind of a regime? But in a way, there's a regime worse than apartheid. And that's what's called warehousing, which is a concept that comes out of the American prison system. And that is that, at least, I mean, it's hard to say something good about apartheid. But at least with apartheid, there was a concept of apart. You know, separate development is the way the South Africans put it. Now we know that's bullshit, but at least in terms of the concept, there was an acknowledgement that there were other peoples. We simply had to develop separately. Here, you don't have that acknowledgement. There is no Palestinian people. There are no national rights. There's not even a pretense of a Bantustan. You know, this is simply a prison. Israel looks at the Palestinians as inmates of a prison, where they have no rights. They're wards of the Israeli state. If they riot, because we use non-political language for prisons, the prison guards have every right to suppress the riots. And they're gone. They've disappeared. That's what Israel wants to do. It thinks it can do this. It can, by quietizing the Palestinians, it can make this issue disappear. There's so many other issues, more urgent, to grab our attention. If we can just make this calm, we can get away with apartheid in the way that South Africa couldn't. That's the idea. And the main thing that's preventing that from happening, actually, is us, is civil society. If it was up to the governments, this would have happened. But we have BDS campaigns, churches are speaking out, trade unions are speaking out. The Palestine issue, in my view, has really assumed the proportions of the anti-apartheid struggle all over the world. So that's what's keeping it on the map. Otherwise, Israel would have succeeded. So we have an apartheid state. That's the second option. You know, and Israel thinks they've won. That's it. There's no third option. We've got the second option. It's ours. And it's a prison, but with the back door open. In other words, if Palestinians want to leave the prison, and they're completely disabused of the notion that they're going to get a state, that they're a side, that we're going to negotiate with them, that they have rights. No. You're in prison. That's the message of Gaza, of this summer. And what we've kind of noticed is that before Gaza, when those 3 settler kids were kidnapped and killed, there was a military operation in the West Bank. It wasn't just looking for these kids that they knew were dead, actually, because they even had a phone recording. But they kept this whole thing as if they're looking for them. And it was a military operation called Operation Brother's Keeper, in which 2,000 Palestinian homes were ransacked. And about 500 people arrested. I mean, it was a military operation in the West Bank, followed by Operation Protective Edge in Gaza. So that the message of Israel, this is after the Kerry Initiative collapses, Israel's message to the Palestinians was and is, forget negotiations, forget 2 states, forget being a people. You inmates, you Arabs, have three options. You can submit to us. You can submit. You can just live as Arabs in a Jewish country. As Arabs, not as Palestinians. You can live as Arabs if you shut up and know your place and don't, as the Bible says, raise your heads. We'll let you stay here by sufferance, not by right, but only if you submit. Or you leave, or you die. Those are your options. And that's really where Israel, I think, is left in. So it seems to me clear where we have to go with this. I think we have to go with the flow. We have to say, okay, Israel eliminated the two-state solution. Israel eliminated the two-state solution deliberately, consciously. I mean, it wasn't a mistake. Over decades. Israel created one state. Okay. Now we have one state, but one apartheid state of warehousing is unacceptable. So our task, it seems to me, is clear. How we have to turn that apartheid state into a democratic state of equal rights for all its inhabitants. It seems that's the only option, the only third option I can come up with that would be acceptable to us. So Israel can't complain that, oh, no, one state, it's not a Jewish state, Israel has a right to be a Jewish state, da, 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 da. No, you can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't, if you want a Jewish state, even that's problematic, but we will leave that aside, then take the two-state solution. You have the state of Israel. If you want the whole thing, the whole country, plus 4.5 million Palestinians, okay, you can do that, you have this power, but then don't turn around and say you want to be Jewish. Because that's apartheid. You're privileging one population over the other. So it's Israel, in a sense, that destroyed Zionism. Israel destroyed the possibility of Israel being a Jewish state, although that also wasn't really possible, but it was more possible, and has created apartheid. And so we simply have to say, all right, I would say, like Canada, actually, it should be a binational state. In other words, I think the idea is to have one state, equal citizenship, but nevertheless recognize and acknowledge and build into it that there are two national communities. We can't ignore that national factor. So just to summarize, now the problem is, and I'll talk about it more tomorrow, is that the Palestinians aren't there yet. I mean, I can't advocate, to tell you. I mean, I can bring this up, but I have to stop short of saying, okay, now let's go out and fight for this, because it's the Palestinians' call. I mean, I'm not a Palestinian. I can't tell them what the solution is. And they're in a transition. It's very hard for them. It's not just a technical thing, one state, two states. The two-state solution, as unjust as it might have been, at least gave a modicum of national self-determination. We'd have a state as Palestine. We'd be in the UN. We'd be in the Olympics. A small state, but it's a state. That's the culmination of a national liberation struggle, which is what they've been in for 100 years. The minute you abandon that, and you begin to move towards a one-state solution, your whole struggle is transformed into a civil rights struggle, which is a whole different animal. And the Palestinians, I don't think, are there. It's hard for them to make that, to give up the idea of a national self-determination. So as long as you're in that transition, I have to respect that and stop short. But I think that this is, where we're going. I'm trying to kind of flesh out the idea that I'll be doing tomorrow. But if we get there at some point, I have the slogan ready. I have the slogan ready for the struggle. And that is, BDS equals BDS. In other words, boycotts, divestment, sanctions, that movement, because BDS is a tactic, it's a tool. It isn't the solution. You have to BDS for something. And our weakness today is that we don't have an end game. So you can't be in a political struggle and not have an end game, you know. So you have to link BDS to a political solution or vision. And that's where I say BDS equals BDS. In other words, boycotts, divestment, sanctions equals a binational democratic state. That's pretty neat. So I'll leave it at that, and we can talk.